What's up, you freaking geniuses? So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to add and subtract complex fractions and write your answer in standard form. All right, so here, this problem, we have 2 over 1 minus I minus 3 over 1 plus I. All right, so in order to add and subtract complex fractions, you need to multiply each fraction by its complex conjugate. Okay, so for this first fraction, you can see in the denominator, we have 1 minus I. So the complex conjugate for this denominator would simply be 1 plus I. All right, you basically write the exact same complex number right here. The only difference is you change the sign in the middle, right? So here we're subtracting, so we're going to change it to an addition symbol, all right? And you also multiply this on the bottom and the top. So we have to multiply the top by 1 plus I as well. Okay, and we have to do the same thing with the other fraction. So this is our complex denominator right here, 1 plus I, right? Put that in parentheses. So we're going to again multiply by the complex conjugate, which in this case would be 1 minus I. And again, what we do to the bottom, we do to the top, right? So we have to multiply by 1 minus I on top as well. Okay, now let's just rewrite this down here and expand it a little bit so we can see what's actually going on. So on top we have 2 times 1 plus I, and again that's over these two, right? So we have 1 minus I times 1 plus I, and then we're subtracting this one over here, right? So got our other big fraction, 3 times 1 minus I on top, and then on the bottom, you might notice that we have the same two factors as we do on this side, right? They're just reverse. But with multiplication, order doesn't matter, right? So we could write these parentheses first. So we could put 1 minus I right there, and then we could put these parentheses second. So 1 plus I, right? What was the point of doing that? Well, as you can see, now we have the exact same denominators. And in order to add or subtract fractions, whether they're just regular fractions or complex fractions, you need to have the exact same denominators. Okay, so now if we wanted to, we could write this as one big fraction and combine it because, like we said, if we have the same, let's just look at two simple fractions. So if we had, for example, 2/3 plus 5/3. Okay, here we can add or subtract these numbers again because they have the same denominator. So this is equal to, or it's the same thing as 2 plus 5 over 3. Okay, so we can do the exact same thing with our fractions over here. So we can combine the tops. So we can say 2 times 1 plus I, and then we're subtracting, right? So we're going to say minus, and then put our other top right there, right? 3 times 1 minus I, close the parentheses, and then it's all going to go over the exact same denominator that they share, which again is 1 minus I times 1 plus I. Okay, great. So now let's just multiply everything together. So let's distribute this 2 into these parentheses right here. So first of all, 2 times 1 is equal to 2, and 2 times I is equal to positive 2I. And then here we have negative 3 times 1 is equal to negative 3, and negative 3 times negative I is positive 3I, all right? And then that's going to go all over our denominator right here. Now here we can actually multiply these together. So first of all, 1 times 1 is equal to 1, and then 1 times I is equal to positive 1I. And then here, negative I times 1 is equal to negative I. And then negative I times positive I is I times I is equal to I squared. And a negative times a positive is a negative, right? So then here we get negative I squared. Okay, so then I'm going to get rid of this to make some room so we can finish this problem right here. The last thing we have to do is just combine like terms. So on top, we have 2 minus 3, which is equal to negative 1. And then here, 2i plus 3i is equal to 5i, so plus 5i. And then in the denominator, let's see, we have this positive I and negative I, so those cancel out. So we're left with just 1 minus I squared, right? 1 minus I squared. All right. Great, so now that we simplified this as much as possible, the last thing we have to do is get rid of these I squared terms. So remember, I, just I, is defined as the square root of negative 1, okay? But when you square it, when you square I, right, so if we square it, right, that's the same thing as squaring this whole thing. You can see whenever you square a square root, those simply cancel out, and you're simply left with whatever's inside the radical, which in this case would be a -1. So I squared is equal to -1. So let's replace all of our I squareds with -1s. So here, this is going to be equal to -1 plus 5i. So this is just an I, right? That's not I squared, so we'll leave it alone. And that's over 1 minus I squared. And like we said, I squared is equal to -1, right? So we'll plug in a -1 right there. So here we get -1 plus 5i. 1 minus -1 is +2. So then here we can finally split these up into two fractions. So here we're going to say -1 over 2, and then we're adding, right? So we're going to say plus this other fraction, 5 over 2, and then don't forget your I right there. So this would be our final answer in standard form. So if you found the video helpful, make sure to leave a thumbs up down below. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments section below.